This is Jennifer Gonzalez welcoming you to episode 166 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we're going to learn how universal design for learning is an essential tool for equity. My local library has two different ways to enter the building from the parking lot: a staircase or a ramp. Years ago, when I would take my 3 kids there, I would always take the stairs, but every time my kids would run up the ramp, stopping every now and then to dangle from the railing. The ramp, of course, was built for wheelchair access, but anyone could use it. That's universal design, the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. It's not about creating special options that are exclusive to one group, but rather offering lots of options that people can choose from to make something work best for them. Universal design for learning, also known as UDL, takes that same principle and applies it to instruction. My guests, Katie Novak and Mirko Chardin, believe that UDL is a big key to making schools more equitable for students of all backgrounds. Their book, Equity by Design, Delivering on the Power and Promise of UDL, offers a blueprint for how to do that. In our conversation today, we talk about the basic principles of UDL and give a sample lesson of the full UDL treatment so you can see how it works. Katie has also written a blog post for the site that covers the same information. To find that, go to Cult of Pedagogy, click podcast, and choose episode 166. Before we start, I would like to thank Chardin for sponsoring this episode. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that the tools and routines that have traditionally powered classrooms need more flexibility. If it taught us another thing, it's that piecemeal online tools cannot replace a well-designed quality curriculum. So how to maintain both flexibility and quality? Is that too much to ask? At Chardin, they don't think so. The Chardin Education Platform houses curriculum, instruction, and assessment in one place, and they partner with top-rated curriculum publishers like Open Up Resources, Fish Tank Learning, and Illustrative Math through Kendall Hunt, so schools and districts can deliver the highest quality digital curriculum on Chardin's flexible platform and continue teaching in any environment. Educators love their teacher-friendly platform with options to engage in discourse online or in person. And students love Chardin for how easy it is to see their assignments and complete their work interactively. Choose from their curriculum menu or import your existing curriculum to bring it to life with Chardin. Request a demo today at teach.chardin.co/pedagogy. That's teach.kiddom.co/pedagogy. Support also comes from Hapara. Google and Hapara are better together. The Hapara Instructional Management Suite streamlines Google's G Suite for Education to create a seamless teaching and learning experience for one-to-one classrooms, remote learning, and hybrid models. Teachers love it because it simplifies teaching workflows and helps students organize themselves for learning. It makes giving formative feedback quick and easy, automates and helps you track differentiation, keeps kids safe online, and gives them reminders to turn in their Google Classroom assignments. To find out more about how you can use Hapara at your school, visit hapara.com/cultofpedagogy. That's HAPARA.com/cultofpedagogy. Finally, I want to remind you to get your copy of the 2021 edition of my Teacher's Guide to Tech. This PDF guide was created to help busy teachers make smart decisions about technology. More than 450 tools organized into categories, with quick links to videos that show you the tool in use, plus a thick section of tips at the beginning and a big glossary of tech terms at the end. This year's guide has over 90 new tools and 6 brand new categories: financial literacy, images and icons, keyboarding, media literacy, social justice and anti-racism, and vocabulary builders. You can see all buying options at teachersguidetotech.com, and because you're a podcast listener, you can use the code LISTENER at checkout and get 10% off. That's teachersguidetotech.com. Now here's my interview with Mirko Chardin and Katie Novak about universal design for learning. So, Katie and Mirko, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, so excited to join you today.
Thank you. So, we are going to be talking today about universal design for learning, or UDL. Before we dig into that, if you could each take a turn and just tell us a little bit about your work as educators and really kind of how it relates to the topic today.
Yeah, sure. My name is Katie Novak, and I am a lifetime educator. I was a middle school English teacher for most of my teaching career, and then I became an administrator. I was an assistant superintendent for 6 years, and now I am focused on consulting. And regardless of the space that I was in education, I always recognized that it was such a privilege to be able to teach. Regardless of if I was an administrator or a consultant, there is something so beautiful about going through the learning and unlearning and relearning process. And so I'm really committed to recognizing that when we teach, we have to recognize that our learners are so beautifully different from one another. And if we're
Mm.
going to meet their needs equally, we have to be really flexible and provide lots of options and choices for learners to personalize learning themselves. So, whether we're talking about preschool students or adult learners, everyone deserves to have a voice in their own education.
Awesome. Okay, Mirko, how about you?
Well, I am Mirko Chardin. I'm the founding head of school of the Putnam Avenue Upper School in Cambridge. I am committed to networking and consulting to support educational leaders, teachers, and kiddos across our nation. Co-author Equity by Design with Katie, an active hip hop artist. And my journey to education has been, somewhat non-traditional in that I was expelled from three schools.
Mm.
As a student, I had felony gun charges actually when I started high school, and completely believed that I should drop out when I was 16, and that school was not a place for me.
Wow.
A brown boy growing up in the inner city. But when I encountered educators who taught me that I had a voice, who incorporated that voice into designing, the educational setting and put materials in front of me that were relevant and helped me get that school was supposed to not be rehearsal for life, but something that prepares me and helps me understand life. My school trajectory changed, and my entire life trajectory and conception of who I am as an individual changed.
Hmm.
And that fire is something that I carry with me, and is what makes me a proud educator who's committed to supporting others.
Wow, I'm so glad that you happen to have the right educators sort of in your path that really changed that trajectory for you.
It certainly changed everything.
Yeah, and so the two of you, as you mentioned, have a book called Equity by Design, and you've collaborated on this together. And that was really the reason that we're getting together, is because you've got this book out there that once people have listened to this conversation, if they want to dig deeper into the stuff that you all are teaching, that is where they should go. And I'm going to provide links to that in the show notes and everything like that. And Katie and I have worked for a couple of weeks now on a blog post that is pretty much what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be going over some of the main points. Um, so, people listening, if they want to see more about that, that's where they're going to be able to go to learn more about that. So, if we could just get started, let's just start with a very quick basic definition of what is UDL, Universal Design for Learning.
So, UDL is a framework and a way to approach designing learning experiences. So many people think of it as something you do as opposed to just an approach for everything that you design for learners. And it's really trying to keep some things in mind, and we'll talk them about those a little bit more, but it's essentially our learners are different from each other, and that's what makes it so amazing and beautiful. But knowing that they're so different from each other, we need to provide them with different options and choices to meet the same goals. So I'm going to give you a little scenario to show you how this works.
Okay.
So Mirko, both and I, we're educators. And do you remember, Mirko, how they used to have those amazing like PTO breakfasts during Teacher Appreciation Week?
Oh yeah, one of my favorite times of year.
It was my favorite time of year. There would be like a hot chocolate bar, and there would have like quiches and muffins. And what was your favorite thing on that buffet?
Oh, I think I would often love the type of coffee that would come in because it would be very different than the type of coffee we'd have in the building. And I would love a good quiche.
Nice. Good quiche. Yeah.
Yes.
School coffee is
I
not
was, I
good.
know, in like that, in the sad white styrofoam cups that if you
Hmm.
hold them a little bit too hard, like your fingernails go through them, like a velociraptor. So, yeah, so we loved that so much just because there was just so many options and choices. And, the PTO was like very universal in their design of that breakfast because they were thinking, like, what really is our goal? We want to show all of these amazing educators that, like, we appreciate them by providing them with something that they can eat, something that is accessible, something that is delicious, something that is culturally sustaining. And yet, it would not work out so great if everybody came in and they're like, all right, everyone, we have made you pre-ordered, bacon, egg, and cheese sandwiches. And I would have been like, okay, that seems fine. Mirko, Jen, I don't know about you if you would be psyched about the bacon, egg, and cheese. What do you think?
Not at all.
Oh, I would love it.
Okay, yeah, okay.
See?
So
Very
we'll
different.
take
Yeah.
them. We'll take them. But
Hmm.
what we can predict is that there's going to be some people who are lactose intolerant, who eat a plant-based diet, might have gluten sensitivity, just don't like that kind of breakfast. And
Hmm.
we know all over the world, breakfast sandwiches are very kind of a rather dominant American dish.
Yeah.
And so when we design for all, we recognize that variability and we realize that one size fits all prevents some people from meeting the goal. It's actually an exclusionary practice. So we want to design opportunities that everyone can see themselves in the planning and can work towards those same goals. And so clearly we know that if we all go like rolling into the teacher's room and there's only like one thing, some people are going to be like, gosh, like this breakfast is terrible. Like my needs aren't met at all. And yet we perpetuate one size fits all practices in schools by saying everyone has to read the same thing in the same way, has to respond to the same math problems. And in doing that, we don't embrace the beauty of our classroom.
So basically what you're saying is that when it comes to instruction, what we're trying to do with universal design for learning is we're trying to design learning experiences so that learners with different abilities and interests and preferences and so on and so forth can come at the same material from different angles through different pathways and still basically come out of that experience with about the same kind of learning.
Right. I mean, all of us can enjoy a well balanced breakfast, but we're going to need different options to create our plates.
Okay. So we're going to, in a few minutes, we're going to look at sort of how that actually works and probably answer the biggest question, which is how is that even different from differentiation? Well, why don't we do that right now? I know I've got that question coming up later, but I know that people who aren't that familiar with UDL are going to be like, isn't that just differentiated instruction? So maybe let's do that. And then we'll dig into the core beliefs and we're going to look at an actual sort of sample lesson and see what UDL looks like in action. But how is it different from differentiation?
So, differentiated instruction is very responsive and it's based on really fresh formative assessment data. So it's about like what do my students need right now. And so there is really high quality differentiated instruction, and that's just being aware that students likely need different levels of support. It's providing a flexible universally designed formative assessment, and then recognizing, wow, there's some students who really need a little bit more help in this area. These students could really use more acceleration, and I'm actually going to provide them with different experiences. But what is really unique about universal design is that we're really allowing everyone to choose their own pathway to get to
Mm,
that point of formative assessment. So in differentiated instruction, there's this concept of this is what struggling students need. This is what my, students who are past proficiency need. This is what English learners need, as if those groups are the same. And that's bananas, because
mm,
people will ask me all the time, what does UDL look like for, fill in
mm,
the blank,
mm.
students with disabilities? Students with disabilities are not the same. There
Yeah.
is still so much variability within any group. And so one of the things that I try to think about is going back to this breakfast analogy. The idea of differentiated instruction would be from the very beginning saying, I know that I have people who are going to be eating a plant based diet, so I'm going to have a vegan sandwich for the vegans. And then I
Mm,
also know that I have some people who, for example, love croissants. So I'm going to have, a croissant station for that group. And
mm-hmm.
So the teacher's doing a ton of work, but then, what if somebody comes in, like I am not vegan, but I'm like, oh, I would love to have, a plant-based sandwich. And it's like, oh, no, that's not for you. And
Got it.
so differentiated instruction is essentially a layer on top of UDL, where at the beginning you say, what are all the potential ingredients that we could provide, including what we know will be necessary for some? And then let's let everybody put together breakfast. Now, let's say that Mirko, I see him over in the corner, and all he has done is made one giant heap of like beans. And my goal is for like more of a balanced breakfast. I'll differentiate support and I'll be like, hey, Mirko, so remember, we're trying to have more balance. Did you see what we had out for veggies? And so it's not like one or the other.
Mm.
It's when we universally design well, we allow everybody equal opportunities to make choices about their learning. And then when we look at that formative assessment data, we might say, oh gosh, these 4 people aren't eating at all. I want to make sure I pull them for a small group and see what they need. And so it's not that I'm like predetermining what people need. And Mirko, you can talk a little bit about how when you start with differentiated instruction, like right from the beginning, these are the students who need this, these are the students who need that. Number one, it does not embrace variability, that we do need different things at different times. But also, there's this potential for implicit bias to essentially create these groups that students are stuck in. So,
Mm.
Mirko, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think this is what makes UDL such an awesome, tool for equity, because it really requires us, when we think about lifting up voice and choice, it really requires us to think about the student experience and the student being in the driver's seat. Very, very familiar to, one of my favorite, Dr. Chris Emden quotes that, equity is hearing somebody's voice about what they need and providing that for them. And I think what kinder way, and particularly if we are talking about supporting, some of our kiddos who historically have struggled the most within our schools, what kinder way to treat them with respect and dignity than to invite them into the conversation and allow them to have some voice on what
Mm.
happens to them in the classroom so that the school experience actually feels like it's being done with them and for them, opposed to something that's being done to them. And this is something that personally resonated with me a lot when I, shared a little bit about being disengaged in school. Part of that is because it didn't feel like it was a place that mattered in my life. I think when we think about, universal design and inviting our kiddos in to partner with us,
Mm.
we open an opportunity that says, hey, this school experience is supposed to be about helping you make sense of the world outside of school. And the only way that we can authentically make sense of what's going on with you is to hear your voice. Now, it certainly requires us to operate a little differently. As teachers. But I think it's one of the best ways that we can truly say, hey, our students are our customers and our clients.
Mm.
And their voice matters. The adage in our world and society is that the customer is always supposed to be right. Let's make sure that we're not communicating a message to our kiddos that that's not the case for them.
Yeah.
That they're empty vessels to be filled because we make all the decisions for them. Um, that's one of the chief ways I think this is very different than differentiated instructions.
And the other thing, Mirko, that you said that makes me just think about the power of differentiated instruction in like driving universal design in the future is, let's say that, at my breakfast buffet, I'm like noticing, oh gosh, formative assessment data, these 5 people aren't eating, I'm going to pull them over. And it's not so much how do I fix it? The first thing is, what do you need to be able to eat? And so,
Mm.
it's like, here, why aren't you choosing fruits and vegetables? And having that conversation of like, well, I don't eat that because of this, and this bothers me because of this. But if you had this other option, and, one of the things that is so tricky is that sometimes as educators, we take on that it's up to us to design everything. And yet, as a middle class white educator, I only know what I know.
Mm.
And if I'm even putting together a buffet of breakfast, I only know the ingredients that I know. And those might not reflect the culture of all of the members of the staff. And so it's having an opportunity to say, what options do you need? And then being aware that when there's not success, it's not so much, why didn't you get it? It's
Mm.
what could I have designed differently? And so
Mm.
I think that they're both incredibly necessary. I think that great teachers design with variability in mind, provide students with opportunities to become learners, to practice executive functioning, to provide feedback. But ultimately, if we see that students are not making decisions yet that allow them to be successful, we do want to provide that additional intervention or enrichment or acceleration, and we do that through differentiated instruction.
Okay. And I just wanted to emphasize before we start getting into the details that really the angle that you all are taking with this book is that UDL, which has been around for a while now, but it hasn't been maybe as widely used, but it has been a thing for a while, really is a very important tool for achieving equity in our schools with kids who, for whatever reason, have not been successful in the way that we have done school up to now. And I just think that a lot of times when, particularly this year, the concept of equity has become even more of a priority than it was before for even more teachers. And so in their search for, diversifying their classroom libraries and all of the other things that we're trying to do to achieve equity, there's been something available to us for a while right now called UDL, which really makes the instruction itself more equitable for all of our students.
Yep. I mean, you
Yeah.
nailed it.
Absolutely.
That's a t-shirt.
Absolutely.
That's a very wordy t-shirt. Okay. So
I'd buy it.
let's get into the core beliefs. We're gonna do sort of what the core beliefs of UDL are, and then we're going to actually look at how one would plan a UDL lesson with like a sample. So what are the, you've got 3 core beliefs.
Yeah. So I think that, again, it's very easy to think of it as like UDL is something I'm going to do tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And like it's just a skill. And I think of school improvement as being like a 3-legged stool, and one leg is our belief systems. And the other leg is the skill set that we build to support those belief systems. And then the third leg is kind of the systemic resources. Do we have the curriculum and the technology and the schedule that we need to really meet the needs of all learners? And so when I think about universal design, the system certainly has a responsibility to provide high quality professional learning, to adopt really high quality curriculum resources that are flexible, and that making sure that students have tools in their hands that allow them to self-differentiate their learning, using a lot of digital tools. But then we have this skill set and this belief system. And the belief system is necessary to truly build the skill set that is necessary. So I'm going to start off with this concept of variability, which is that we were sold a big old bill of goods that student labels meant something for their learning. That, like, once we had a label on a kid, we knew exactly what they needed. And it's just so silly that I learned that and I had to unlearn it, because it's like, well, we have these students who are struggling readers. Okay, what do I do? It's like, if you think about the myriad of reasons why students might struggle with reading, is it decoding? Is it phonics? Is it comprehension? Is it attention? Like, you just don't know. And then
Right.
the other tricky thing is that struggles and strengths are incredibly contextual. So you could call me a strong reader, because if you gave me a standardized assessment in the right environment, I would be able to decode. I have a strong background in vocabulary. I would be able to comprehend. But I'm only a strong reader if the text is in English,
Yeah.
because I only speak English. I'm only a strong reader if I have corrective lenses in, because if I don't have contacts or glasses, I cannot see a page. I'm only a strong reader if the lights are on. And so to really embrace UDL is we have to embrace the context of learning, that students are going to need different things based on where they're at socially and emotionally, based on the time of instruction, based on what we're focusing on. And that leads us to, it doesn't make sense that we're going to decide what students need when we can't control the context of their environment. And so once we see that, we start to say, oh my goodness, of course it makes sense to think about the goals and to provide different options and choices and say, based on this context, what do you need right now to move closer to this goal so you can share what you've learned? And so that is the first one. Mirko's going to talk about the second 2.
Okay.
So the second one is the idea of firm goals and flexible means. Let's really dig into making sure that we understand what that standard is asking us to do, and that we're specifically focusing on making sure that we have the capacity to understand what it looks like when this work is done well, and that we're not adding things, to the standard. And I like thinking about this in some ways, almost like, vacation planning or trip planning. We know what that goal is, we know what that target destination is. Now let's start thinking about what are barriers, considering the variability that exists or may exist within our classroom. What are barriers that may get in the way, of kiddos getting there?
Mm,
And, how do we, chart paths to that goal, that destination, that take into consideration flexibility? Because what's important is that everybody gets to that destination together, that
right.
we all make this trip. But it's not the avenue in which we take to get there, right? So if I stick with this metaphor, some of us might like to fly, some of us might have fears of flying. So, we might be in store for a road trip.
Hmm.
Some of us might really want to walk or ride a bike. That should all be okay as long as we get to that destination on time. So, how do we then ensure that it's not a circumstance of us saying, hey, I know what this standard is asking all of my students to do, and I need them to all do it in the same way? Because if they're not all rowing in the same way, it makes things a little bit confusing for me. Well, my focus is supposed to be on that outcome,
Yeah.
and not ensuring that all of my kiddos conform or, you know, manifest in the classroom in the same way. So it's important to keep this in mind. And for me, I mean, I mentioned this a little earlier, but I think it's going back to that adage of our students or our clients and our customers. We have a service that we provide, it's the educational experience. And let's make sure that our own biases, our own judgments, things that we don't know, that go above and beyond, whether or not we have good intent, let's make sure that those aren't things that are getting in the way. And if we are really thinking about this in deep and rich ways, let's take into consideration identity as well, ours and that, of our kiddos,
Hmm.
as we're thinking about barriers and things that can limit, you know, their ability to get, to that target destination. Um, Now, the next, ideal or part of our belief system is, this idea of preparing students to become expert learners. That we believe we have high expectations and believe that if provided with the right supports, we can ensure that our kiddos can develop a sense of self-efficacy so that they are in the driver's seat of their learning. That they're not going to develop this sense of dependence in which we need to carry the weight as it pertains to cognitive tasks because they're assuming that they need us to direct them on what resources, on what strategies they should utilize, or that we do the heavy lifting in the classroom. But no, this is a circumstance in which we believe that all of our kiddos have what it takes, to direct course, if we can support them in doing that. And a wonderful strategy that comes from Mike Anderson's book, the learning to choose, choosing to learn,
Hmm.
is this idea of the choose, do, review. Because one of the things that I think freaks out folks when they first encounter this idea of universal design and providing kids with choice is that we need to give up some power in the classroom. That's one
Mm.
thing.
Hmm.
And two, will our kids make bad decisions? Um, in certain circumstances, they will, and particularly if it's the first time that they've been provided with that opportunity to
Yeah.
choose. But that's where this idea of the choose, do, review is so powerful. I'd even say it lifts up for us that reflection is one of the most powerful parts of the learning experience because it creates an opportunity for us to dig in with our kiddos as they make decisions and reflect on what the outcomes were,
Yeah.
um, so that it can become a rich, teachable moment. And we need to have the confidence and the belief in them, expressing the fact that we truly do have high expectations for them by believing that, as we go through this process, they're learning and will make better decisions. And we as teacher can then enter into the role of being a facilitator, of learning,
Yeah.
rather than being the sage on the stage.
Right. And that process does not happen overnight. There has to be it's got to be kind of a rocky road to get there. The kids have to make mistakes in order to learn how to advocate and take charge of their own learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So people have to be prepared for that mess a little bit.
And I mean, that's how we all learn what works for us and what doesn't work for us. I think it's an
Exactly.
equally valuable lesson of, wow, I tried that strategy and it just wasn't effective. And I
Right.
would always celebrate with learners. That's great. you know that based on that context, that doesn't work great for you. It doesn't mean it won't work in the future. It doesn't mean that you can't scaffold it to work better. But like, what a celebration of self knowledge to know that that is just not the most effective strategy. But too often, we don't even let students know that there is more than one strategy. Like,
Right.
because
Exactly.
it's just, well, this is how you do it, and then it's not accessible, it's not engaging, it's not linguistically appropriate, it's not trauma informed, it's not culturally responsive. And then it's like, oh gosh, this is so frustrating. Like, kids aren't making good choices. We never have given them the chance to make those choices.
Right. Right. So to wrap up, what last thing we're going to do is go through an example, and I asked you to do something that probably a lot of people would kind of understand, which would have been something like from a health class. And we're going to talk about kind of what would that look like normally, and then what would it look like if we actually approached it with a UDL mindset instead. So why don't you all talk us through that?
Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the before. Is I know when I was in school and I first started teaching, I would think about what I was going to design that everybody would follow the recipe. So right now, what's very important is thinking about kind of the spread of germs and disease, and
Mm,
we're very aware right now in this world that it's very important to kind of protect yourself from the spread of things like COVID-19, for example.
hmm.
And so, one of the things that you could do, for instance, is to say, all right, class, everybody is going to watch this video from the Center for Disease Control. And then you're going to write an essay about how you can reduce your risk of contracting or spreading COVID-19. That would be like a very traditional lesson. High quality resources from the CDC, certainly aligned to grade level standards. So there's a firm goal. But then we have to say, what really is it that we need students to know and do? And being aware of how we spread disease, or for instance, is not a writing standard. So
Mm,
I know that writing will create a barrier. I also know that having a video, for example, can be really, really difficult because it does require the ability to auditorily process. Because the print isn't in front of you, it becomes much more difficult to cite evidence. So if you're expecting students to cite something, I don't know if y'all remember, but when we were like in middle school, before you could like look up lyrics on the computer, a song you like would come on and you'd be like, oh, I got to get those lyrics down. And it would be like, rewind, fast forward, rewind, fast forward. And it was maddening. And
yeah.
therefore, if we're expecting students to respond to something that they're viewing, we have to see that there are barriers to remembering exactly what was said in the video. And so I would say that excludes a lot of students. The video is in English. It does require having a pretty strong working memory or the ability to take really copious notes quickly. And then, of course, we're requiring students to write an essay when we're not actually looking at a writing standard. And
Mhm.
so when we give this the UDL treatment, I'll talk a little bit about how we can make things a little more engaging. And then Mirko will talk about how do we actually design instruction that aligns a little bit more closely to student funds of knowledge, for example, connects with their background and their community. And then we'll talk about how we can then measure whether or not students have met that goal. That would be that formative assessment time where we then would look at the results and say, ooh, these kiddos need a little bit more support, a little bit more technical language, so I'm just going to pull a small group.
Okay.
So when we're talking about the multiple means of engagement, what I know first of all is that there's not going to be necessarily all students are not going to be interested in the same thing. And so, yes, right now it's very tempting to talk about COVID-19, but there are a lot of other things that we can contract. And so, what I might do at the beginning of the lesson is to project a list of like really common communicable diseases. And that could be, strep throat, COVID-19, influenza. There's visuals next to them. And so, basically saying to students, okay, look at this list, think about what you know about this. Feel free to look any of these things up on your phone. And then I would say, is there any other things that are like going around that your friends could catch? And imagine someone being like, oh, what about mono? Oh, I love it. Let's add mono to the list. So essentially, we're like co-creating what is it that we want to learn more about. What I would then say is you're going to choose one of those diseases, whichever one you want, and you can work alone or you can work with a partner. So think about what would be best for your learning. If you feel like it would be better just to kind of buckle down and throw in your earbuds and focus, that's great. If you want to be more social, that's great. But I want you to think about, when you choose one of those, let's say mono, what are all the symptoms of mono? And here's a graphic organizer that you can use, or you can just write in your notebook. And again, just find some resources. What do you know about this? What do you want to know about this? What does this look like? And as students are working, again, they have the option to use their devices. I might have a bunch of books at the back of the classroom, some CDC brochures, but it's essentially, think about what information would help you to learn. And by nature of having these devices, students can look it up in any language. They can watch videos. They can look at visuals. You could go on TikTok, for goodness sake. But they're doing their own research to build that background knowledge, and it's getting them to recognize you have all the tools you need to be a learner. You have your peers you can work with. You have this graphic organizer, if that will help you. You have your phones or the devices, and your voice is important. So it's not just what I've planned, but I want you to contribute to that buffet, to decide what you want to bring in. And that gives me kind of a basis to bring in that interest and to know that we're creating this together. And then we'd say, okay, so now that we're all in the same place, now we're going to actually kind of teach this lesson. So instead of just putting on a CDC video, Mirko will talk about what you could do instead.
Okay.
So instead of just putting on a CDC video, I think it makes sense as an opportunity to grab voice, from our kiddos, to be able to ask them, about how this would show up, in their lives in the most impactful or powerful way. All of our kiddos are not going to have the same background information. They're not going to share the same funds of knowledge. It's important for us to be able to access their voices, to make sense of and to give them an opportunity to share about what experiences they may have had, with this content or this subject matter. Might be a great opportunity, to engage in a mini lesson on some targeted vocabulary. Let's not make assumptions about what we think some of our kiddos know. Also a great opportunity to think about, do any of our students have any family members who may be, involved in the medical field or medical industry? May be a great opportunity to make a connection and have someone call in, perhaps via Zoom or something, and share some expertise. We need to take into consideration multiple ways to ensure that our students are able to access this information in ways that work for them, and multiple ways for them to continue to dig in and make sure that they're comprehending and understanding this in a powerful way. Now when we think about our students being able to share what they've learned, it's important for us to think about variability again and provide them with opportunities to maybe record a video or podcast, to create a pamphlet, an infographic, or maybe even suggest an alternative that works for them in being able to communicate, what their understanding is.
Okay. And so just as a review of these three pieces, because I want to make sure that we actually use the UDL terms for all of this. When a person is taking a UDL approach to designing a lesson, we're looking at multiple means of engagement. And correct me if I'm wrong, that means how they actually enter into the conversation. Or no, maybe I'm not getting
So
not saying it right.
engagement is really like equal parts attention and commitment. So the first part is, how do we get their attention? How do we get them interested?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so
Yeah.
we definitely need different options to get students interested, just because they just have such different backgrounds and different interests. Multiple means of representation is very much about how we present the content. How do
Got it.
we provide opportunities for students to learn? So instead of saying you all have to watch a CDC video, it's like you could watch the video, you could read the transcript, you could
Okay.
translate the transcript into another language, you
Mhm.
could read this article. And so there's many ways for students to learn, but we have to really be deliberate and planful about making sure that we're pulling out and helping to teach the most important language, and also that we're giving students lots of opportunities to make connections. And then the multiple means of action and expression is, what are the potential pathways where students could share what they know? So in this health lesson, we just want to know that students understand how diseases are spread and how to prevent that. It doesn't have to be an essay. So in like that first scenario, it's you're all going to watch the video, you're all going to write an essay. And it excludes so many students who might struggle with the auditory processing from watching the video, who might not have background information in the language, who struggle with writing. And when we think about the goal is just, do you understand how diseases spread? And can you explain to me how diseases spread and how we prevent that spreading? And any student, every student can succeed if we are flexible about how we recruit their interest, how we get them to recognize what their options are for learning, but also what are their options for continuing to put in effort, working
Yeah.
together, seeing family members on Zoom, having lots of exemplars and scaffolds, opportunities to revise. That allows students to continue to put in effort when things get challenging.
Got it. Mirko, did you want to add anything else to that?
Well, just that it's important for us to keep in mind that our roles are to, facilitate learning and to help students develop a sense of independence. We're not always going to be in their lives.
Mm.
We're supposed to use this moment in time in their lives to support the development of their skills and to help develop that self-efficacy so that they know that they'll be able to do this without an adult always being needed to be there to intervene on their behalf, because this is about independence and not dependence on us always having to be the ones who think and make decisions for our kiddos.
I think that's an excellent point, because this is not just about making all of these things available. It's really teaching them how to make choices and design their own learning experiences, and that carries much further than our individual classrooms.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the book again is Equity by Design. Did you want to tell us anything else about the book itself? Because we're going to be putting links to that. Because what we really wanted to do today was really introduce people to the whole concept of UDL in general. Is there anything else you wanted to sort of add about that?
I think what's really cool about Equity by Design is in every chapter, we have 2 or 3 implementation spotlights from really diverse educators in the field. And so we were able to, elevate and celebrate a lot of really specific strategies that are used in schools and in districts and classrooms by so many practitioners using their own voices. And so it really was an incredible collaboration where we talk about voice and choice, but we also wanted to make sure that we were optimizing voice throughout the book as well.
Those kinds of examples are so helpful too, because I think all of this stuff in theory sounds great, but I think a lot of times teachers don't necessarily get it until they see it in action. So seeing examples from real teachers is so helpful. Where can teachers learn more about this from you online? Where can they find you online?
So I am on Twitter as Katie Novak UDL, and my website is novaceducation.com. And Mirko, when you say your Twitter name, you have to tell the story, because everyone always thinks you just like milk a lot.
So I'm on Twitter as at Mirko Milk. You can also find me on the Novak website. And the milk part is just it's a long lasting nickname that has stuck with me since early adolescence. It's a nickname that I didn't like at first, but I think those ones sometimes have a way of following us. So it's part of who I am now.
But what's the story?
Yeah, like, did people call you
skipping the story.
Mirko Milk or just Milk?
Oh, so I was told that I always looked like an old school rapper named Milk D. And I would always push back and say, nope, look nothing like him. I get it. He wears glasses, I wear glasses. That's it. But the comparisons continued until I was willing to accept that there must be some type of connection. So
He does. I just Googled his picture. There is kind of like a vibe there.
That's a riot. Okay, so I will make sure that people listening, if they go to episode 166 on Cult of Pedagogy, I'll have links to your book and to the Novak Education website and to your Twitter profiles and everything, so people can follow up with you and ask questions if they have anything. Thank you both so much. We had to record this in 2 separate sessions, so thank you so much for your patience. And this is I was telling Katie while we were in the second room that she's not going to believe how seamless and smooth this is all going to end up in the final product. No one's going to know how lumpy it was for us.
You know what? But that's a whole part of the amazing journey of learning, is that there are a lot of ups and downs, and we just have to
Yep.
make a safe enough classroom and a safe enough school that you can, handle the downs and laugh at the ups.
Yes,
Absolutely. Embrace it, persevere, keep it moving. Keep smiling.
Yeah. Thank you guys both so much. Thanks so much for coming on.
It was so nice to chat with you.
Yeah, it was an honor.
To read Katie's blog post outlining all the points we covered here today, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 166. And to get your copy of the Teacher's Guide to Tech, visit teachersguidetotech.com, and remember to use the code LISTENER at checkout to get 10% off. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great day.